Okay, what we're going to do is we have about 20 speakers. Everybody's going to just take a few minutes and talk about issues relevant to them and their group. What I'm going to do is introduce the speakers. Our first speaker is going to be Janet Forrest, and she's going to talk about channeling Vandita Shiva, Women, Climate, and Food. Janet? You want to use that one?
Why you starting with me? I don't know. Okay. Climate change isn't predicated solely on our use of fossil fuels, but also on the management of our natural resources. I'm going to present a position which is based on my readings of Vandana Shiva, citizen of India, authoress, physicist, farmer, and as she refers to herself, eco-feminist. She states in her book, Staying Alive, that, quote, women produce and reproduce life not merely biologically, but also through their social role in providing sustenance, end quote. She cites the work of Lee and Devore, who claim that among existing hunters and gatherers, women provide up to 80% of the daily food, whereas men contribute only a small portion by hunting. I first became aware of Vandana Shiva when I was substitute teaching for a high school science class in Pennsylvania. I was to show the documentary film Dirt. Scientists and farmers throughout the world were represented and spoke of our problem with the lack of water, deforestation, monoculture and cash crops, and the lack of biodiversity in our land use for agriculture. In the film, Ms. Shiva spoke specifically about the lack of biodiversity in the soil. Growing plants that enrich the soil and in many cases can ward off intruding insects and weeds without the use of pesticides and weed killers would be a preferable choice rather than to serve and enrich the chemical companies. She mentioned that in India, because of the biodiversity, they have developed a strain of wheat that doesn't cause the problems with gluten. Again in her book, and she has written 18 books on the subject and related subjects, that, quote, with the destruction of forests, water, and land, we are losing our life support systems. This destruction is taking place in the name of development and progress. But there must be something seriously wrong with the concept of progress that threatens survival itself. The Industrial Revolution converted economics from the prudent management for sustenance and basic need satisfaction into a process of commodity production for profit maximization. It is significant that Ms. Shiva came to visit Iowa in the spring of 2015, a state of industrial farming of the monoculture crops of corn and soy, as well as the CAFOs. I was fortunate enough to attend both of Vandana Shiva's lectures in Iowa City, at the Capitol and at the Englert. In her lecture at the Englert, she spoke of Sir Francis Bacon's The Father of Modern Science. I quote, for Bacon, nature was no longer Mother Nature, but a female nature, conquered by an aggressive masculine mind. This transformation of nature from a living, nurturing mother to inert, dead, and manipulable matter was eminently suited to the exploitation imperative of growing capitalism. In much of the world, there existed the commons. The commons was shared land that the farmers, many of them women, used for their own sustenance. This shared land is being privatized and converted to cash crops that often deplete the soil of its richness and require vast amounts of water. In this country, we are faced with the takeover of the GMOs. Europe is still trying to fight this, but we in this country have pretty much come to accept it as the norm. The challenge is daunting. We can try to buy organic foods produced locally. We can garden ourselves. Our choice is either viable use of our natural resources for the sustenance of all, or the exploitation of it for the few. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Our next speaker is Mike Carberry. Mike is going to talk about getting fossil fuel money out of politics. Mike?
Thanks, everybody. I'm a county supervisor, and it didn't take a lot of money. I didn't raise a lot of money to get elected county supervisor, but I've been considering running for governor. And my consultants, but I may not do it, and here's one of the reasons why. The consultants tell me it's going to take $4 million to raise, to be competitive, to be governor of Iowa. It's $2 million in the primary and $2 million in the general election if you're successful. That's embarrassing. And what it leads me to believe is that we do have the best political system that money can buy. And we have a political system that's bought and paid for, and it goes to the highest bidder. And unfortunately, the wealthy and the powerful, they have more of that than we do. And but what we have is people. And so let me go back a little bit. I got into environmental politics in the year 2000. I was caucusing for Bill Bradley. He won Johnson County. It was the only thing that he won in the whole election. It's here for Bill Bradley. So then I backed blue and I got behind Al Gore. And I read Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance. And it changed my life. I was an antique dealer. And all of a sudden I heard about global warming. We didn't call it climate change then, called it global warming. And it was the issue that's the defining issue of our generation. Future generations will judge us on how we've dealt with this problem. They will either thank us or they will blame us. And right now, the way it's going, they're going to say they knew and they didn't do anything about it. But we're trying as hard as we can, right? We're doing everything we can. Look at this crowd in this terrible weather. We have a wonderful crowd here, and there's crowds all over the country and all over the world that are gathering today. But the forces of evil already have it in their pocket. They want things to stay the same. So what we really need to do is, if the environment is one of your number one issues, it needs to be your second issue. Your first issue needs to be getting the money out of politics. Because until we get the money out of politics, if your issues are climate change, if there happen to be Planned Parenthood or civil rights, in any issue that you think of, we're not getting right now because we don't have the power and because the money is stacked against us. So we have to overturn Citizens United. We have to elect politicians that want to get the money out of politics, people that are willing to take a $27 donation instead of a $27,000 donation. And then what do you get in return for $27? I don't know anybody that could be bought for $27, okay? So we need, and so what happened at the state session this last year, the last 4 months? A lot of bad things. And what was happening is a lot of those bills that were passed were not, they didn't run on them. But who wrote those bills was a group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And they're completely funded by the Koch brothers. Where do the Koch brothers get their money? From fossil fuels. So the Koch brothers are really controlling this country and other fossil fuel corporations. What we need to do is get out and vote in every election, get progressive Democrats or progressive independents or Green Party, you name it. We need to get people in office that are willing to stand up to those fossil fuel interests and give our country back to the people and take it away from the fossil fuel corporations. So that's what I've got. Get out there and raise hell.
Thanks, Mike. Blair, you wanted to get up and talk about the immune system of Mother Earth? Thank you, Blair.
Yes.
Visual display. Okay, I've long specialized in wholeness. When I think of what I specialize in, biodiversity and wholeness. So I'd like to greet you all. Hello, people of the rainbow.
Hello.
I'm excited because I think that we have a collective voice, You might be wondering where all the religious leaders, city leaders, and leaders of healthcare and education and economics are, and well, some of them are right here. If we look in the mirror, some of them are right here. And I stand for Gaia's Peace Garden, which is a template in northern Iowa City, and a place to practice being in a new paradigm. Biodiversity and wholeness are two key words for Gaia's Peace Garden. Wholeness, because it represents all of us. And as disparate and as divided up as all of the issues seem to be, they're all interwoven just as you and I are interwoven. So we have truth, and truth is indestructible. And I think that one of the things about truth is that when we unite, we are the immune system and the practical visionaries of Mother Earth. And Mother Earth knows that she has lots of great categories to rely on, like fungi, mushrooms, herbs, flowers, and animals, critters. Who am I leaving out? People. People. We are also a part of the immune system, but we're suppressed. We're suppressed and oppressed and exploited when members of the rainbow, of the warriors of the rainbow, members of the human race do not have their voices heard. And that's what we're all about, is we're being advocates and enablers so that everyone can be heard. And that's why we're here today. And so I celebrate the wholeness of today. I tell you that blame, I'm watching for who has the 30-second marker. Okay, am I there already? 1 minute, okay. Blame is a waste of energy. Blame is like leaving a door open in a big house on a cold day. It doesn't get you anywhere. Accountability is something different. Accountability comes, and accountability is coming for the heavy, heavy, dense energies that are predominant in so many greed and corrupt organizations. But the accountability is there. But we are moving onward into biodiversity, and this is how we move ahead by visualization, and we connect four things together. This is my conclusion, okay? Remember who we are. Remembering who we are, and sometimes the best way to remember who we are is in silence together in places like gardens, like come to Gaia's Peace Garden. Remember who you are. A little ad there. Dare to imagine what we can be. That's the second thing. Dare to imagine. Imagine. And some say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. You know, somebody that wrote a song. You gotta write a song like that. Attunement. Attunement is reminding ourselves that we are more alike than we are different. We are 75% water all the way around the planet. Guess what? The planet is 75% water or something like that. And that's exciting to me. Okay, number 2, remember that we are family. I heard that at Standing Rock every day for 9 days in a row. We are family. The last thing is to gather up actions, but like at Standing Rock, every morning we were reminded, connect the actions, the ideas with people. Here's some people. And implement those ideas. Care for one another. Be kind to one another. Uplift one another. And frequently use words like encourage, affirm, empower. Criticism has, you know, and competition is like, we have no need for them. That's like on a train headed to a cliff. Let's get off the train and regenerate and renew.
Our next speaker is Maureen McCue. Maureen?
I'm behind you.
All right. All right. And Maureen is going to talk about the intersections between militarism and climate. Wow.
Hi. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the organizers. Thanks for coming out on this horrible, awful, no good, very bad day. But it's a good day to celebrate. Climate change makes me and all the planet sick. I am a physician. Climate makes us sick, but it's making the entire planet sick. And while we're pushing for more drilling offshore, more drilling on protected lands, more drilling on sacred lands, Today's headlines, for those of you who may have had a chance to look at them, the Arctic is unraveling. It is already 3 degrees warmed. We've already now passed 410 parts per billion of CO2, never before seen in millions of years. This number just keeps ticking up. It was predicted and it has happened. There has been no other more critical time than right now for us to stand up and show full opposition to this administration's destructive policies, to obliterate climate science, to eradicate programs that protect our climate and our environmental health, derail productive international agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, even while threatening ever more dangerous military action around the world. The U.S. military is the largest user of petroleum. We keep seeking more petroleum because the military keeps using it. And nothing, if you haven't been following, will destroy this life on this planet as we know it faster than a nuclear detonation. Right now, we are pushing for World War III. We must join the rest of the world and support a ban on these weapons and support the efforts to save the climate. Threatening to attack a nuclear-armed country is extremely reckless, as well as illegal, regardless of what that country does or says. North Korea had adhered to an agreement to halt its nuclear weapons program right up until George Bush named it one of the members of the Axis of Evil, and then immediately took off and bombed Iraq, another member of the Axis of Evil. North Korea has repeatedly offered to abandon its nuclear weapons program if the U.S. would stop flying over and practicing bombing it. North Korea has shown interest in developing a peace treaty with South Korea to finally end the Korean War. But if we don't take up any of those offers and we keep threatening it, we are going to get to the end to which we are headed. These existential threats to our climate and to our future can be solved, but only if we vow to work for mutual support and regard across ethnic, faith, identity, and political boundaries. We must call for solutions that fully integrate concerns, all our concerns, racial, social, and economic justice for all. We need to protect our natural resources and the rights of the most vulnerable among us. We must call for a focus on clean energy, an economy that supports living wages, workers' rights, and a clean, healthy environment. At the very same time, 1, 2, and 3 issues, we must move away from the profoundly wasteful and dangerous U.S. military and nuclear weapons budgets that take the resources that impede our collaboration globally to save our planet. Peace is not only possible, it is the only future forward to a livable planet. We demand the U.S. stop pushing for war and work toward a peaceful solution and an intact, healthy environment. We can do it. We must do it. We will do it.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next speaker is Mary Kirkpatrick, Gaia, our Earth Mother, our partner and friend.
I'm Mary Kirkpatrick, member of 100 Grannies. I know there's a lot of grannies here today. I grew up on a farm in eastern Iowa, so the land was the source of our income. It provided our water, air, food, and everything that we needed to survive and thrive. When I was younger, I thought of the earth as being made up of things: rocks, water, air, soil, animals, plants, and then people. Then in the 1960s, James Lovelock, a British scientist, developed the Gaia hypothesis. Gaia was the Greek goddess of the earth. Lovelock's idea was that the earth is a self-regulating system that functions like an organism. He was ridiculed, scoffed at, and severely criticized by fellow scientists for this assertion. Yet it began to make sense to people like me. The earth is incredibly complex and has provided the right mix of conditions for earth to form and survive for thousands and millions of years. We can consider that the earth has intelligence, even wisdom. When I studied permaculture, I learned about the incredible resilience of our Earth Mother. Ecosystems are self-regulating unless there is disturbance by Earth conditions or people. Nature cycles materials, never creating waste. Natural systems are symbiotic, with each part contributing to the whole. When I went to Findhorn, Scotland, I learned about a community there that has pioneered partnership with nature intelligence, the spiritual, unseen parts of nature. Nature is our home, the very life support system we depend on for all our needs. Yet it's obvious to all of us that we're creating conditions that threaten the very future of life on Earth. People sometimes talk about saving the Earth as if we're separate from it, but we are a part of nature, just like everything else on the planet. Our destructive capability is becoming obvious, but our ability to work with nature to restore the health of our Earth is also becoming evidence. How important it is that we call her Mother Earth. What do mothers do? They support us, they help us, they teach us, they nurture us, they love us. I believe that this is true of our Earth Mother as well. We can learn to work with nature, our Mother Earth. We can communicate with her. We can love her. We can learn from her. We can listen to the wisdom she shares if we choose to do so. Then we can act, not just from human thinking, but from a wider perspective. We can view ourselves as partners with the Earth, not saviors. The Earth wouldn't need saving if we treated her like a valued friend rather than a supply of resources to meet our needs. Each of us can do our part, and I thank you for everything that you're doing to change our relationship with Mother Earth. We can open our hearts as well as our minds to thank her for all that she shares so generously. We can treat her with respect and kindness. We can see that our Earth Mother is our partner and friend. Today and every day, let's celebrate this hopeful gift.
Thank you, Mary. Next, Holly, you're up. Holly is going to talk about the position that sustainability, not economics, should drive our politics.
Thanks, and I'm glad to follow what she said because it follows very well, I think. I'm going to read a little note here from the Earth Charter. The dominant patterns of production and consumption are causing environmental devastation, the depletion of resources, and a massive extinction of species. Communities are being undermined, the benefits of development are not shared equitably, and the gap between rich and poor is widening. I'll stop there. Of course, the Earth Charter has some more good things to say, but one of the problems that we constantly or consistently think of as progressives and leftists, most of us, and conservatives as well, is that we tend to apply economic principles to guide and enforce policy. Frequently you hear, well, we would do this, but this is going to affect that population economically. It's going to be a problem. My position is that I want people to start thinking in terms of sustainability. A problem is that all current major economic systems are based on ongoing growth. A friend of mine, a guy by the name of Greg Garrett in Rhode Island, writes that the oligarchies of the world, with the USA being taken over by a very know-nothing version this year, are working actively to prevent countries from doing the right thing. The low-growth era is permanent. The resources are too depleted, and since we cannot end poverty without healing ecosystems, we cannot heal ecosystems without ending poverty. But sustainability needs to be the principle. For those of us who were thrilled by Bernie Sanders' run, and many of us would like to see more social welfare and those principles, and I'm one of them, just remember there was a time when there were countries that were socialist and provided services that I would certainly envy, and people's needs were met, and yet thousands died trying to get away from those countries. And it wasn't just because they were greedy or they wanted to watch Western cartoons. 20 years ago, guess which country came up as number one, and I don't have the reference, but this was verified. The country that was number one on the least efficient energy usage was Sweden. which was a nicer version. Now that's changed a great deal, and Sweden is a good example of what can happen if people get their act together. So basically the sustainability is what I want to push. It used to be called zero growth, but steady state economy and sustainability in terms of economy and ecology, environment, and is something that should be applied and will actually, if it's done fairly, work well. We need to take into consideration the condition of the planet as well as the immediate desires and needs of the electorate. In terms of politics, these are not separate and contradictory. Thank you. I don't have anything else to say, so I ended it.
Thank you, Holly. Next, we're going to hear from Lauren Schmidt. Lauren?
All of us should be partisans of improving the environment and reducing the harm of climate change. If we aren't, our children and those who will be their fellow workers won't have much in the way of lives, nor will they be able to use the water if they find it. We should address these issues in addition to the others about which we care. We should make time to seek out officials and candidates, not to be misled by those who describe themselves as liberals or progressives or moderates. We should insist that they speak and act in the interest of a majority of workers. The choice is not between policies which improve the environment and those which create jobs. The bosses and their supporters, and they have a lot to do with both of the parties of money in this country, will not bring the society closer, anywhere near full employment. The bosses have a stake in maintaining a large and desperate reserve army of labor. This arrangement keeps profits up and wages down. In addition to the development of renewable energy and the reduction of fossil fuels, we should press for improved funding for public schools, for that is where working class children will go. Further, we should defend and support Planned Parenthood, and as part of this, we should dispel the ideological fluff, and there are other terms for it, which surround this issue. That is, some would have us believe that the dispute over that is between conservatives for others, and others, the rest of us. When policies are advanced that scale back Planned Parenthood, thus threatening the health and safety of women, there is nothing conservative about that. Deportations from this country will continue, and health care will be rationed. And if you doubt that, I urge you to go out and find people who struggle to get service from what remains of Medicaid in Iowa, and learn from them. As the safety net is broken down, it is not an exaggeration to note that we are in a position similar to that of Gentiles in Germany 90 years ago. And if we don't do better to organize and raise expectations, soon it'll be much harder. Thanks.
Thank you, Lauren. All right, John, you're up next. And John is going to talk about when we wage war against each other, we also wage war against the planet.
I'm Jadryev. I'm with Veterans for Peace. I also belong to Peace, Iowa. Waging war on people is also waging war on the environment. The effects of war on the environment is usually detrimental. Almost 4 million acres of glyphosate have been sprayed. Wrong war. That was the war on drugs in Colombia. Getting back to the war on people. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. forces sprayed herbicides, Agent Orange, and you know all about the effects of that. Generations have suffered and will continue to suffer because of such use. Also, when warfare causes the mass movement of people, resulting in impacts on the environment can be catastrophic. The humanitarian crisis of refugees is also an environmental crisis. I have a relative, a Marine colonel, retired, who once characterized the military culture in this way. If we are not at war, we are preparing for war. War preparation itself can be as harmful to the environment as war execution. Try Googling Sardinia contamination, for example. The island of Sardinia off Italian main coast has been used for decades as a training area for NATO forces. And they've got birth defects, they've got all kinds of problems. Just Google that sometime. Or also try Googling Vieques, Puerto Rico. And that was an island off Puerto Rico where the United States practiced their bombing runs and artillery exercises. Even regions not directly affected by warfare, due to increased production in manufacturing, agriculture, and other industries that support a war effort, can wreak havoc on the natural environment. U.S. military bases at home end up being on the Superfund list once they're closed. Here in Iowa, in Des Moines County, near Burlington, the former home of the Iowa Army Ammunition Plant is on the list due to surface water and groundwater contamination by explosives from munitions, processing, and creek sediment contamination by explosive and lead. Maureen alluded to this, and it's certainly true. The production, testing, transport, and use of advanced weapons are perhaps the single most destructive effects on war in the environment. We all need to give grave concern about the proliferation of nuclear material and chemical and biological weaponry. The Veterans for Peace has a strong position on protecting the environment. You're invited to explore more about what we have to say by reading our position paper. There's a supply on the table. Or go to our website, www.veteransforpeace, one word, lowercase.org. Thank you so much.
Now I get to bring out my prop. Pitchfork is a symbol of raise more hell and less corn. Okay? What I want to talk to you about, other people already talked about, is water. Careful here.
Yeah.
All right. There we go. Those of you that follow me on Facebook know that I've been on a tear lately about the water in Iowa. Did you know that we have 750 impaired water bodies in Iowa today? That's about 15 more than we had a year ago. We're getting worse rather than better. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, now the size of Connecticut, half of it is due to the farm runoff from Iowa. We have nitrate monitors that are put in place by our rivers around Iowa by the U.S. Geological Survey. 40% of them are now testing nitrates above the safe level. And that level is questionable. The EPA says it's 10 parts per million. In the European Union, it's 4 parts per million. And at the 10 level, we have 40% of our meters testing above the limit. We have 60 towns in Iowa that have nitrates too high to drink. Des Moines is the only one that has a filtration system. There's another 260 towns that are at risk for high nitrate. And the Farm Bureau discounts high nitrate, blah, blah, blah. Let me talk about the consequences if you haven't heard of them already. Blue baby syndrome. Children under 6 months that drink high nitrate water literally suffocate to death. We have birth defects associated with high nitrates. And now we have stomach cancer, thyroid cancer, ovarian cancer. As I traveled around the state in 2016, I had people come to me and said, my sister, my mother, my wife died of ovarian cancer, no history in the family. And the nitrate in the water issue is personal to me. My mother had thyroid cancer in 1998. The surgeons took a tumor the size of a grapefruit out of her neck. My folks never tested their farm well until after Mom had her surgery. Guess what? High nitrates. My folks have retired to the farm and they don't drink the water anymore. We've also got the cost, and this is a staggering number. The estimate is a minimum of $5 billion to fix the nitrate problem in Iowa. And it makes me very angry when legislators brag about a $50 million solution. That means they're willing to wait 100 years to fix the nitrate problem in Iowa. That's a problem. Then we've also got phosphorus. Anybody heard about toxic algae blooms? I just posted today. It is green soup and there's more and more of it. Why? Because we have hog manure and phosphorus in our water. We're up to 22 million hogs. How many more hogs can we jam in this state? Then let's talk about chemicals, and I'm only going to pick on one, Roundup. Last year, farmers in America applied 300 million pounds of Roundup in this country. Roundup has a 22-year life expectancy. It's so pervasive that when they test the rain, U.S. Geological Survey finds Roundup in 75% of the rain they collect now. National Geographic got into the picture. They tested soybeans for Roundup. 90% of the soybeans tested by National Geographic had Roundup in them. You say, big deal. Here's the big deal. The World Health Organization in March 2015, based upon a review of over 900 studies, concluded Roundup is a causal agent for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Okay? Here's where it comes home. In Iowa, we have comprehensive cancer studies being done by our College of Public Health since 1973. Guess what? Every year they publish the top 10 by new cases and deaths. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is in the top 10. Thyroid cancer is in the top 10. Ovarian cancer is in the top 10. And I encourage you to go to the Public Health's website and download the study. Here's the death numbers, and here's the new cases. We're going to have 6,200 Iowans die of cancer this year. That is 20% higher than when they started tracking in the mid-70s. New cases, we will have 17,400 new cases this year. That is three times the new cancer cases we had when they started 4 years ago. 3 times as many Iowans will be diagnosed with cancer this year as in 1975. 3 times. And that 17,400 will join 130,000 Iowans already battling cancer. Guys, we got to do something. Water is life. Standing Rock emphasized that. We keep being told that these chemicals are not harmful and they need them to farm. None of that is true. None of that is true. And I hope, if nothing else today, you go out and find your pitchfork in the garage and you let the neighbors know you're going to raise more hell and less corn. Thank you. Now that I've said my piece, we're going to have Eleanor Taft, and she's going to talk about politicians who are bought by big oil and other lobbies. Eleanor?
First of all, I want to thank the members of the Green Party that organized this event for hosting it and allowing some of us from the Johnson County Democrats to speak. There's so much at stake right now, and to protect our planet, we really need to be standing together and working together on issues where we agree. So I look forward to working with the Green Party more in the future. So there are many meaningful, small personal acts that we can take to help protect our planet. But to actually reverse the catastrophic course we're on, we need legislation. This means we need terrible public speaker. This means we need politicians who represent their constituents, not big oil, big ag, and other corporate donors. I'm sick and tired of hearing from politicians in both the Republican and the Democratic Party that the money they take from destructive corporations doesn't influence their actions. Despite what Citizens United would have us believe, corporations are not human beings. They do not donate to campaigns out of the goodness of their hearts. They're capitalist entities, and their prime directive is profit. When they make an investment, they expect a return. So if we expect to have elected officials who represent the best interests of their constituents and the land and water that keeps them alive, we have to get serious about getting money out of politics. I understand many people's urge to walk away from a system that is broken, but that's exactly what those who control it want and expect. We have to learn about the system to change it and make the kind of system that works for us. I got involved with the Democrats through the Bernie Sanders campaign, and we passed an extremely progressive platform for the Iowa Democratic Party at our state convention. That vision for the party was chosen by the votes of the delegates. which means that the grassroots are progressive. But for that platform to be meaningful, we have to hold our politicians accountable to represent the values of the grassroots. If you want to get involved with the campaign, I can tell you about some really strong candidates running here in Johnson County and statewide. If you're interested in getting involved with the local Democratic Party, I have flyers for the next meeting. I would love to hear from y'all about what you think we should be doing here in Johnson County, because we're supposed to be representing y'all. And I understand that the DNC has a lot of problems, but the state party is mostly made up of the people who show up. So if you don't like where the Democratic Party is headed, you have the option to get involved, learn the rules of the game, and make your voice heard. I encourage, regardless of your party, run for office and challenge bot candidates in any party. Or, if you're not buying what I'm selling, join the Green Party or another activist organization. Our state is being torn apart. Our land and our water and our lives are at risk. Just get involved. We can't wait another day to fight for change, or there may not be a tomorrow.
Thank you, Eleanor. Next, we're going to hear from Vero Rose Smith, Extinction of Experience. Vero?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. This is an interactive talk, so I want you to think of the perfect tree. Give me some factors. What is the perfect tree to you? Yeah. Ooh, a giant pine in front of your house. What else? What makes a perfect tree?
I can climb it.
Yeah. You can climb it. What else?
Green stuff.
It hunts you back. What was back there?
Green stuff.
Green stuff. Here.
Sequoia tree in California.
A sequoia tree in California. Yes.
It makes food and shelter for other life.
Absolutely. So when you think of a perfect tree, are you thinking of a tree you know? Yeah, most of you are. I found that to be true in a research study that I conducted that took a year and a half as part of my design studies at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. I interviewed over 60 people about their memories of trees, and then I found ways to connect the commonalities in those memories to find a way to talk to people that are not in this room about the urgency of climate change. So trees are habitats. Trees are oxygen producers. Trees are carbon sinks. Trees are goalposts. Trees are the location of your first kiss. Trees are where your mother is buried. Trees are also in decline. 17% of the Amazon has been lost over the past 50 years. 46 to 58,000 square miles of forest are lost every single year, which is about 36 football fields per minute. But trees are also everywhere people are, which is why I chose to study them specifically. These facts really don't matter, as we now know after this current election cycle, but what does matter is the feeling that you have when you think of your tree. What does matter is that we are not only facing an unprecedented extinction of species, which is estimated to be between 0.1% to 1% of all species on Earth are going extinct every year. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's usually, at best estimate, 2,000 species a year are disappearing from the planet. Not only are we experiencing an extinction of species, we are on the verge of an extinction of human experience. Who are we without the trees in our lives? Who are we without the environments through which we came into being? I challenge you to leave this room and find people that weren't here today and ask them to tell you a memory of a tree. I think we need to find these starting points where emotions resonate before numbers, or we have no way to talk about the urgency, the dire necessity of preserving our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Vero. Next, we have Douglas Narveson, and going to talk about the story we live by and the effect on the climate crisis.
Thank you. I want to speak about story and climate because story goes beyond reason, which can limit and derange us, and gets to Ahmed. Are we okay?
Okay, you're a little loud.
I can shout.
You were.
Which gets to imagination and will, which are powerful and creative. So, stories. A happy story is one where life goes on. A tragic story is one that ends with permanent death. What is climate? It's not one weather pattern from a day or a week. Climate is the overall pattern of all the different weather patterns from year to year and decade to decade. It's the big picture. It's the system of our weather. And we are in a climate crisis. It is a systemic crisis. So how did we get here? Here's one way to think about it. As high-tech humans who think of ourselves as separate from life, we got here by the story and beliefs that we use to make sense of experience and to guide and coordinate our decisions, our actions, and our agreements. We humans who live mostly in cities and who push nature and humans around have a variety of styles around the planet. But for all our differences, we use the same core belief, a story that we have used for thousands of years. That main story was, the planet, its air, water, and land, and even its life is here for us most of all, for high-tech, pushy humans who gather especially in big cities. We thought it our purpose and destiny to control it all, to make more city-living, high-tech, pushy, high-control humans. We said it would make this world a perfect paradise. It's a weird story. It was a weird story, though, because while we succeeded at converting non-human nature into high-control humans, it has required a lot of total warfare and pollution. Paradise always eluded our grasping reach. But our story had an explanation. Our culture tells us it's because there's something essentially wrong with we humans and with nature. We made war on nature because it was so big and we were young, scared, and smug, as youth can be. And we made war on people because people resist reason and hyper-competition and monopoly control. The story and beliefs of total control, total competition, and total conversion, which arise from doubt, fear, and shame, and from obsessions with separateness and with death, led our kind of civilization, east and west, to where we are now. It was useful in ways and maybe was fitting for our immature phase. But that story and its way of acting is broken. A new phase is already underway. It's time to consciously and imaginatively tell and live a new story and a new way to act. We will benefit by clearly recognizing and using it. So what is this new paradigm and story? Well, what if people and the rest of nature are okay already and good enough as we are, even as we develop and become more? What if sharing works and leads to a kind of paradise as you go? Maybe we will consciously shift more and more to a story arising from trust, confidence, and worth, and from obsessions with interconnectedness and with life, diverse and amazing. It's a story of partnering and sharing with the rest of nature and of engaging people where all people matter and participate freely. It's a story of enough and good enough, once again. So why do I say once again? Because human species have lived by a story that works still for humans after 2 to 3 million years, and it's time for our young culture to mature and to return to the planet's full community of life which has thrived here for 3 billion years. To paraphrase a famous quote, "Blessed are those who share, for they shall inherit continued life on earth." We can turn from an old story of frustration and tragedy to one of success and joy and embrace it consciously. Thanks.
Next speaker is going to be Eric Tate. Eric?
Good afternoon. I wanted to share a little bit about my personal journey. This is my first time with this group. So My first job out of college, I was an engineer, and I worked for the EPA. And we would go to hazardous waste sites, and we'd collect samples, and we'd write reports. And one of my most vivid memories was going to a site in Oklahoma, and there's these waste oil pits, pretty much the size of football fields, going down about maybe 10 feet. And we interviewed a family that was living right on the edge of this waste oil pit. It was a young couple, they were poor, and in their front yard of their mobile home, there was seeps of oil coming up. And they started telling us this story about how they had had like 1 or 2 miscarriages. And they had no idea about linking it, what was going on to their immediate surrounding environment, which was literally killing them. But at the time, I was trained as a scientist, and so I started the way that I viewed this problem was through the lens of chemical toxicity and groundwater flow. But of course, the real problem was our legal and regulatory system that allowed a powerful economic interest to destroy the environment and literally just walk away. Looking back, I feel like I was completely naive at the time. 10 years later, I went to New Orleans and the Mississippi coast in the aftermath of Katrina, and the destruction was just complete. And it didn't matter if you had a poor house, you're a poor home, or you're rich, your house was leveled, especially in Mississippi. And I, as an engineer, I saw the problem as like, massive waves and coastal erosion and destruction of infrastructure. But, in time we see that, the people that were killed were overwhelmingly poor, black, and elderly. And in the Reconstruction process, you saw federal dollars that were focused on homeowners over renters. Federal dollars are supposed to go for the poor were repurposed to develop the port. Was the bigger problem Katrina or our political economic system? More broadly, it started raising questions in my own mind about why is it that the poor and politically marginalized so often bear the environmental burdens while others reap the environmental rewards. And this is sort of the heart of the questions of environmental justice. And climate change is an injustice issue as well. And certainly the last few months have shown me as a scientist that the science is limited in its power to address justice issues. We've entered an age where beliefs and ideology carry more weight than scientific evidence. I think the new power centers lie in grassroots organizing, coalition building, and activism like we see here today. This election and the proposed defunding of the EPA's Environmental Justice Office has made it clear to me that I can no longer sit on the sidelines and I need to get involved. I need to fight for what's right, but also fight for what's just. Okay? And so for climate change, that means extending the umbrella beyond simply environmental impacts to firmly include justice. For example, I'd say that housing is a climate justice issue. In the past generation, we've had major heat waves in Chicago, in France, and Russia, where tens of thousands of people have been killed, primarily elderly, whose homes lacked air conditioning or ventilation. So what happens is climate change accelerates, and the heat waves are more frequent and severe. Immigration is a climate justice issue. We've seen in the past decade how a historic, severe drought and inaction on the government to satisfy the needs of its citizens led to civil war in Syria and the migration of millions. Energy and minerals extraction, obviously, with the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Alberta tar sands, but also gold and copper extraction and hydropower, have ignored and displaced many indigenous communities. Household income is a climate justice issue. Higher temperatures and more frequent events require more air conditioning and stress on agricultural crops. It means more household income is higher percentage devoted to food and electricity. So I'm really heartened by the breadth of interest we have here today. And I think moving forward, we really need to work together that such that your issue is my issue and my issue is your issue. The forces allied against us are strong. We need to be stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Next, we're going to hear from Kristen Ranken. Divestment is a means to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. Is Kristen here?
So we've been hearing a lot in the last few months about the Dakota Access Pipeline, and unfortunately, it is completely constructed now, and according to the Huffington Post, could be in service as soon as May 14th of this year. The pipeline crosses several water sources, putting our drinking water in jeopardy, and has ruined the topsoil of many farmers and also tramples on the rights of indigenous peoples. And we are going to fight Energy Transfer Partners, the company who is building this pipeline, until the very end. I'm with a local group known as the Mississippi Stand Solidarity Network, and we have been focusing on fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline. We have all been focusing on divestment from the pipeline by asking people and businesses to do business with local banks rather than with banks who are invested in this pipeline. When we put our money into the bank, we are in essence giving them a loan with that money, which allows them to make investments in the community, be it through scholarships, getting new companies up and running, such as clean energy companies, or lending money to pipeline companies. The University of Iowa currently has money in 3 banks who are invested in the Dakota Access Pipeline: U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, and the Bank of America. I recently met with the chief financial officer, the chief investment officer, and general counsel to the university in regards to this issue. And I learned that because they are a state-run institution, it turns out that the people in these roles cannot make the decision to divest from these banks. Therefore, if we want the university to divest, we have to go not to the chief investment officer, not to the university president, not to the Board of Regents even, but straight to our state legislators and demand that they divest from fossil fuels and the banks and companies who support their continued use, and that they then invest in clean energy. Because it's not enough to just say, we don't want this pipeline, because after this one, they're just going to build another one. And there are already a lot of other pipelines being built right now, aside from the Dakota Access Pipeline. We have to make oil, natural gas, and coal obsolete for our own sake, our children's sake, for the sake of our water and of the earth. The technology for clean energy is out there, and let's start investing in it.
Thank you, Kristen. Damita Brown, is Damita Brown here? You're up.
Is this good?
Yeah.
Oh, it's good to be here. You guys are beautiful. And I just want to share a tool that comes from my wisdom lineage. But before I do that, I want to invite you to revisit your wisdom lineage. So, how many of you raised your hands if, when you were little, somebody taught you how to tie your shoes? Okay. And somebody taught them, and somebody taught them, and somebody. How many of you invented a shoe? No, so we are standing on the shoulders of hundreds of generations of innovation and development. So we have a very vast wisdom lineage as a human community. And those are the shoulders we're standing on. So that's our foundation. We're standing on those shoulders. And I want to encourage you to connect with your wisdom lineages. Because those are what have sustained us till now. All the innovation, these lights, the ability of this building to stand up, it was a huge trial and error, a history of trial and error, to the point where we don't have to figure out how to make a building stand up anymore. We've inherited a wisdom lineage that allows us to sit here in comfort. So we have to respect the ancestors and what they've given us so far, if we want to be able to pass something forward. I thought I'd have better luck with this mic, but I think it's okay. So, the tool that I want to share comes from one of my teachers. Her name is Pema Chodron, and she talks all over the world about how to work with difficult emotions and how to work with when you get in a place where you don't know how to communicate with someone that you really need to communicate with, what you can do. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we have a wonderful little bubble right here. We're talking to people who agree with us in this room. But we know that going forward, we're going to have to go over to Steve King's county and talk to his people. And if we don't go talk to Steve King's people, what are we doing? All right? Because we have to broaden this conversation. You know, we can't keep talking to each other. I mean, it's nice, but we've got a lot of work to do, right? So we're talking about a paradigm shift. We're talking about moving to the next level. And one of the things that my teachers tell us all the time is that getting to that next level means developing some tools that we haven't been that good at using. And one of them is working in difficult situations with people we disagree with people who don't have the same background as we do. Maybe they don't speak the same language, they don't vote for the same people. So basically, just take a minute and maybe I'll ask you to close your eyes. I know. This is good though, because right now we're all in a pretty vulnerable situation, and when we close our eyes, we become a little bit more vulnerable, right? So when you're talking to someone and they say something that pushes your buttons, they hook you, the habitual response would be to hook back. The habitual response would be to retaliate. However, what we could do instead is to feel our vulnerability in that moment instead of shutting down to that moment. So that tightness that comes up, that closing that comes up, that's a tool. That's a tool that reminds you of something that's beyond you. So you can use that tightness. And the first step is to let go of the storyline about what just happened to you, and to feel the energy that you're feeling in your body when that happens. And you can open your eyes now. So you're there with that tight space. You've been offended. Somebody says something that triggered you. And you're in that tight space where you want to shut down and you want to say something that's going to end this conversation. Instead of doing that, you drop that storyline and you feel that energy. That energy itself is a powerful tool. And it has to stay beyond the storyline. You have to connect with the energy in order for it to work. So you use that energy and you allow yourself to be vulnerable in that moment. So there's not a reactivity that happens. There's a listening there, there's a slowing down there, there's a connection to the space around you there, there's a willingness to hear this fellow human being beyond a storyline. So that's what you're connecting to when you don't react. When you slow it down and you give yourself the spaciousness that's around that experience. And that space ends nowhere, right? It goes on forever. And we're a part of that. But when we tighten and close, we solidify the separation with making our minds smaller. But when you slow down and open, you create the opportunity that you connect with that vastness, which is where your wisdom lineage is constantly talking to you. So that's the tool. Good luck. There's plenty of opportunities to practice, right?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Damita. We've just got a couple more. Do we have a representative of Little Creek Camp here? Somebody wanted to speak on behalf of Little Creek Camp? Okay. Then next, I would like to call on Ann Silander. And you're going to talk about Indigenous in Iowa on the march to Des Moines.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Almost. I can't hear myself. Actually, my name is Erin. People have been getting that mixed up lately because the other name comes up on my Facebook page. Sorry about that. So this week I met up with folks from Little Creek Camp, from Bold, Iowa, and from other groups on a Climate Unity March to Des Moines. I drove out to meet them at the church where they were staying in the little town of Reasoner, Iowa. Very small town, very small town. When I asked how I could be of service, they said, well, could you go door to door? And I'm like, oh. Okay. I said, okay, because I knew if I thought about it, I wouldn't. So I just did. I went with another walker, and we encouraged each other to keep knocking on doors. They said, go door to door and invite parents and kids to have dinner with us and to watch a puppet show about climate change. I joined the group in Reasoner because I'd heard there'd been some trouble early on in the march. The first day out, some motorists were hostile, using gestures and revving their engines. A farmer ran out and shouted at people, said, "Get out of my area." At the end of the first day, a pickup truck with Confederate and U.S. flags parked at the perimeter of the campground where they were staying. Its occupants watched intently as a woman with the advance team set up tents. Later that night, campers heard what they thought were gunshots nearby. They were understandably quite nervous. Early the next morning, the driver of the pickup approached the group. He apologized for causing so much anxiety the night before. He said he had preconceived notions. He thought they'd be noisy and disruptive, a bunch of hippies and radicals, and was amazed to find they were quiet and respectful. He and his wife had a good visit with the campers over breakfast. He reassured them that what they'd heard the night before were not gunshots, but firecrackers that were routinely set off by a particular neighbor. We all hate that, he said. While fairly conservative, he agreed that water quality is a concern for Iowans. Old Iowa's plan for the walk to Des Moines with visits to small towns was a good one, walking and talking with people along the way. The organizer of the march said he had walked the entire pipeline, DAPL pipeline route. Before construction began, he told us that people were friendly and he never felt threatened. There were many good conversations on this trip to Des Moines. Unfortunately, there was quite a bit of harassment. It was a diverse group of about 25, white, African American, Latino, and Native American. They had to adapt to feel safe while walking along county roads. They stayed close in a tight-knit group so nobody would feel like they were a target or an angry driver. Native American women heading up the group decided they would try carrying the U.S. flag, which wasn't easy to do in the wind and the rain that we saw this week. But they did find there was less harassment. People have been very supportive since I was arrested in Lee County at a DAPL protest. That means a lot. I often get discouraged from some of the things we heard today. I have to admit, though, the truth is it wasn't very hard to get arrested. Well, anything can happen in that kind of situation, and you have to expect that. In Keokuk, They didn't bring out attack dogs. I wasn't shot at, pepper sprayed, or battered with fire hoses in sub-zero temperatures. I was actually treated very well. And it may not always be that way. I think not. But this isn't only about climate change, is it? This is kind of where it all comes together. When the walk to Des Moines is over, and when this event is over, it will be more important than ever, as our last speaker said, to talk with people we don't necessarily agree with. We have to learn to do that in a better way. It may be uncomfortable, but it's possible. At least I hope it is. We do have common ground, and no one should have to go it alone, should they?
Thank you, Erin. Now we're going to hear from Janet Greenwald.
I didn't sign up to speak. Sorry.
You didn't, okay. All right. Pat Miner. Pat, come up and say a few words.
Let's see, am I close enough now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for hanging out to listen to me, even if you didn't know it. I represent a group called Iowans for Palestine, and so I normally talk about Israel and Palestine, and that's what I'm going to talk about this time, but I don't often get a chance to talk about Palestinian water rights, which is what I want to mention today. And there's, in 1947, as we all know, the UN divided the land, which we call the Holy Land, into two states, supposedly. And Israel, at that time, most of us are too young to remember this specifically, but the Israelis took the land and started to make it what we call bloom in the desert, just like they did in the Southwest United States. Many times we made the desert bloom. But what we don't think about is what that takes to make the desert bloom. What it means is that it takes a lot of water that doesn't normally fall on that land. And in Palestine, what it means is that the Israelis took water away from the Palestinians. And at this point in time, the Palestinians have control of none of the water resources in their land. The Israelis have control of both aquifers. There's an aquifer on the mountaintop there, and there's an aquifer along the Gaza Strip. There's also two main rivers. Can't remember what the other one is, but of course one of them is the Jordan River, and then of course there's the Sea of Galilee. And at this point, the Sea of Galilee is starting to get depleted. And so what's going to happen in the time to come is that the water is going to be depleted. And at this particular point in time, the Palestinians are not allowed to have enough water to maintain their agricultural land so that they can have their crops, so that they can then sell them in the outer world. Also, what happens is that in the meantime, the Israelis have green lawns and swimming pools. So it's really, and then at times, now this is a climate issue, I guess, but it's man-made in this particular case, is that the Israelis will also poison the water supply that the Palestinians do have. They will, for example, put dead animals, they'll kill their goats or their sheep, put them in the creeks so that the water is poisoned. They will, in some cases, have, as many of you probably know, they have settlements above, because they've taken the tops of the hills, the best water on the top of, or the best space on top of the hills for their settlements, and then the sewage runs downhill to the Palestinian water supply. So I don't get a chance to talk about this very often, but it's certainly an issue that is relevant in their lifestyles. And the only way we can do anything about it, and we've heard about lots of money being in politics, and that's what we need to deal with, is just talking about the United States is involved because we give Israel tons of money. It's $10 million over the next, or $10 billion.
It is a good 10 billion.
What, 10 billion?
It's 7.8 billion and change.
Yeah, over the next 10 years. So it's a lot of money that we give them. And in the meantime, we expect the Palestinians to, we wonder why they take up arms against us. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not for any kind of violence and for any reason. But it's certainly understandable that the Palestinians see Israel as the bully in the neighborhood, and that sometimes the only way they can get rid of their own frustrations is by striking out. And so I'd ask you to help me by talking to your legislators about this issue and telling them about that you're concerned about Palestinian water rights. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. That's everybody that's on my list. Is there anybody that's signed up to speak that I haven't called on?
Actually, we're past 3 o'clock, so I'm just wondering whether I need to really speak, because I'm not going to probably have anything new to say, but I would like to...
Tell them your name.
My name is Mary Beth Versgrove, and I would like to talk a little bit about the Dakota Access Pipeline, and I thought on a list that I got I was going to be after Kristen, so we've kind of gotten some other speakers in here in between, but I think that what we're all trying to say is pretty much the same thing, and it all fits together. It is all connected. For those of you who are not aware, the Dakota Access Pipeline, which is now complete, as Kristen mentioned, is the first crude oil pipeline in Iowa, and is also the first crude oil pipeline that has been built by Energy Transfer Partners. It extends from the Bakken and Three Forks production region in North Dakota to a crude oil market hub, which is located near Pacoda, Illinois. And it's designated to carry over 570,000 barrels per day. So it was built with that intention. It may actually end up carrying more than that. And it will carry that oil through North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, and Illinois to the Pacoda hub, where it will be transferred then to other pipelines and refineries that will be located not only in the Midwest, but also in the Gulf Coast. And 80% of the U.S. refineries are located in that area. So we're talking about providing a pretty important source of oil to those refineries. In Iowa, the Dakota Access Pipeline crosses 18 counties. It enters the state in Lyon County in the northwest corner of Iowa and extends to the southeast to Lee County, where it crosses the Mississippi River. From there, it will go to Pacoda, Illinois. So, if we are to believe a document which was presented by the Dakota Access people, Energy Transfer Partners, at the time that the evidentiary hearing took place in November of 2015, there will be, quote, no significant impacts to land use due to this pipeline. I don't know that any of you probably haven't traveled in the course of the year somewhere where you didn't see something going on in one of these 18 counties. For me, I spent a lot of time traveling to Des Moines, and I kept going past the same places all the time. and Boone, not only in Boone County north of Des Moines, but in outside of Newton. I actually made one trip one day where they were working on the north side of the interstate, and when I came home in the evening after a rally there, they were working on the south side of the interstate. So that's how quickly they were working on this pipeline. Once they began construction, they had a deadline, and they really worked pretty much around the clock, almost everywhere, to get it done. So DAPL not only passes through 18 counties in Iowa, but it passes through 11 watersheds in Iowa. And within these watersheds, the route crosses 75 rivers, streams, and ditches. In addition, there are additional tributaries to which these water courses and adjacent wetlands are crossed by the pipeline, too small to number. So we're talking about a significant impact on the state of Iowa, basically a diagonal line that's going across every major watershed and hitting over 75 rivers and streams. That's a lot of water. In late August of 2016, Jessica Resnicek, who is a Des Moines Catholic worker and also just a social justice person who's been thrown out of Palestine, by the way, for her work there, not allowed to return to that country. She took it upon herself to locate herself at the construction site outside of Montrose, Iowa, at the Mississippi River, where the boring underneath the river was taking place. One single woman by herself. She was arrested twice in the first week that she was down there, trying to block the entrance to the construction site. Shortly after her second arrest, a number of us went down there to visit her and to find out what we could do to help. And subsequently, the Mississippi Stand Solidarity Network formed when a group of people in Iowa City got together and decided that it was time to go to the Mississippi and take up our fight. So many people in this room were involved in the protests that took place at the Mississippi River. And I'm preaching to the choir, but I think it's really important that we recognize that until many of us could see with our own eyes what was happening at that site, could actually stand and watch this enormous drill boring underneath the Mississippi River and look at the accumulation of the tailing ponds that other people have talked about today. Toxic materials being used to frack through that rock, to go through that rock, to get underneath the river, were then disposed of in a tailing pond on the adjacent farmland. That substance, those substances, and all of the water used to do that drilling were then sucked out with these huge vacuum trucks and transported all over Lee County and dumped on farm ground. Now, obviously, they had to have permission to do this, but the dumping site that I visited and took pictures at was actually a dumping site that was in a wetland area. So not only were there crops there, but there were also cattails there. And that area is now all pretty much cemented in from these tailings. So at any rate, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that experience at the Mississippi. It was a powerful experience for hundreds and hundreds of people. People from Illinois, people from Missouri, people from Kansas, people from Iowa came there and were able to actually see, because we were allowed to trespass through private property to the construction site, we could actually see what was going on. That area was completely obstructed by trees from the Great Mississippi River Road. People who were driving by would not even have known that it was going on. They would have seen nothing. Although you could see, driving into Lee County, you could see the pipeline from where you entered the county just completely, I'll use the word raping the countryside. And now when you go down there, everything is green again, and so there's no evidence that the pipeline is there. However, the people of Lee County are actually going to be probably a sacrifice zone, as we heard earlier about when Eric was talking about visiting these places. Those people's water supply comes from less than 5 miles from that construction site where the pipeline goes underneath the river. And I do just want to say that there were 5 of us, grannies, that chose to plead not guilty and asked for a jury trial.
For you.
Basically. Good for us for asking, but whether that ever happens or not, I'm not sure. I'm not so confident that it will ever happen. So we basically are in kind of a holding position right now, but we felt that it was important enough to get our story, get the story of this pipeline into some kind of a record, so that in the event that there would be a spill, and there will be a spill at some point in time, it's just a matter of when, but if that spill would be in the Mississippi River, it would be less than 30 minutes before the water supply of the people in Keokuk would be completely shut down, the water plant shuts down. So it's a very important thing, and I would just ask that that you understand that those people in Lee County have been fighting this since the first day that they received mail in their mailboxes. As a matter of fact, we have one woman who was one of 2 families who refused to sign an easement agreement. And she's 90 years old. And she has offered to testify at our trial. Because her life has been completely turned upside down with this whole pipeline. She refused to sign and her land was taken from her, it was condemned, and it was taken by eminent domain. The other woman who refused to sign is dead. She never made it that far. She had a stroke and died, and she was in her 80s. So it is important, I think, for us to remember today that there are people down there that are still literally trying to fight this pipeline, and we can't give up that fight. We have to do what Kristen has talked about. We have to try to use divestment and other means to stop this kind of fossil fuel extraction from continuing to happen. So I just ask for your support in doing that. We've heard lots and lots of good ideas today, and I know that there are people all over Iowa who would appreciate it. Thank you.
Let me ask for a quick show of hands. How many people joined the protest down there? Chris, you were down there? Thank you. Thank you. It was great that Jessica started that. Let me kind of put a wrap on this. One of the things you've heard about is money. You've heard about donations. Chris and a number of other people documented, one second, the money that politicians in Iowa took for Dakota Access. Dave Loebsack took $5 grand. Dave Loebsack took $5 grand. And they grease politicians on both sides. One of the things that you need to do, beyond the activism you've done today and all the activism you've done to this point, and all I can say is thank God for the grannies. Thank God for you grannies. You're doing great work. Follow the money. Follow the money. Shame the politicians that take fossil fuel money. Shame them.
One point that's really important to make about the Dakota Access Pipeline is about a huge part of the pipeline exists along a fault line where about like one of the strongest earthquakes, like I think 8 on the Richter scale. So if we have an earthquake along that fault line, the pipeline could possibly.
It's on the fault line. One of the things, everybody agrees, there will be a leak. There will be a leak. Keystone leaked up in South Dakota. Took 3 weeks for the oil to stop coming out after they fixed the leak. And that land will never be the same. One of the things we need to do is we need to have politicians accountable to us. We need to make them account for the money they take from people like Dakota Access. So as you leave here today, I want to thank you for your commitment to the earth. Thank you for your commitment to activism. The next battle is going to be over money, because until we get the dirty money out of politics, the politicians are going to work for big oil and fossil fuel. And so make that your goal as you leave here today. Follow the money. Call the politicians out like Dave Loebsack and say, why did you take Dakota Access money? With that, Holly, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm sorry, I was just messing with my hair.
I appreciate your patience in staying past the scheduled time. Go forth and do good. Thank you.